Thank you very much for coming here to chat with us this morning, actually. Dr. Quartermain, it's a great pleasure. We'll start out with territorial acknowledgement. As newcomers and ancestors to the settlers of this territory, we acknowledge that UNB is situated on unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Wolastoqey Nation. This territory extends from Maine to the southeast of St. John, where the mighty Wolastoq, now known as the St. John River, meets the Atlantic Ocean. So, we really thought this would be a good idea because this is the start of Earth Science Week globally, with major events, mainly in the United States and also in the UK, parts of Europe, as well as in some parts of Canada. And Dr. Ann Timmermans has taken this up as a major thing that to raise awareness across New Brunswick and obviously UNB about this through her curator activities and outreach activities par excellence at Quartermain Earth Science Center. So thanks a lot, Ann, for doing that. And we'll move to our guest speaker, who is, needs no introduction amongst us really, but I'm going to do the formal introduction, Bob, anyway. First, I'll ask you, do you mind me referring to you as Bob? I
Yes,
have
please.
So for many years.
Yes,
So,
please.
So that'll be much easier, plus I won't screw up so easily. Anyway, as the projector lasts here, Bob submitted a really interesting title that I think really helps us out quite a bit. Blue sky is really, I think, one of the great things that helps us appreciate some optimism and looking to the future, looking to clearer days ahead and stuff, and really is really one of the foundations for life, for blue sky and other aspects. So we really want to talk about Bob's career from that perspective, mainly because there is so much blue sky in his career that it's, I wonder if it ever does rain in Bob's world. So anyway, that also speaks a little bit about our mutual experiences here at UNB, which really create a lot of blue sky in my career that I probably wouldn't have otherwise seen. So, and that's one of the connections that both Bob and I have is our appreciation of some of the educators here, in particular Dr. Arne McAllister, who he had donated money with Silver Standard to actually create one of our field trip activities that helps build our blue sky appreciation of the world around us. And so thanks a lot for that, Bob. So we have a set of questions, and I have my crib notes here. It's not like a lecture where I can go off the cuff too easy, but so let's just talk, frankly to Bob about a little bit about his history from the start to the end, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions afterwards. So Bob, you've spoken very warmly and generously about your life growing up in the typical beautiful town of St. Andrews, New Brunswick, which I know and love and hold my part of field school, and the beautiful St. Croix River meets the blue ocean and the blue sky, and your amazing journey really starts there. So if you could tell us some of the most important things in your childhood that really brought you so much success in your later years.
Sure. So again, I'm from here. My parents actually met in St. Andrews, and I spent the early years of my life growing up in St. Stephen on the border town. My grandfather ran a store called Quartermain's Woolens, Tartans, and Blankets. So early on, I think when I was about 12, I started working in the family business and worked on there for many years through till I was certainly a teenager. And my grandfather was a serial entrepreneur, and so that gave me my first exposure to sales and entrepreneurship, which is ultimately, when you get into running public companies, a large part of what I have to do. So it's certainly formative. In 1963, we moved from St. Stephen to St. John. My dad at the time worked for Irving Oil. He started initially working for Mr. Casey Irving, but ultimately worked for Mr. Arthur Irving, who's still around and still someone I consider a bit of a family friend, along with he and his family. And we moved to St. John, and there were two things that occurred that were informative for me. The first is I joined Boy Scouts, and that in itself doesn't seem important, but it meant that I learned to tent and camp, and I could follow a compass and knew how to get my way home. And following on from that, I went to Air Cadets, and Air Cadets taught me good organizational skill training. So as Dave pointed out, I first went to UNBSJ because, like many of you, that's all I could afford to do. I was very fortunate in my first year to get a entrance scholarship. It was $400. Back then, tuition, I think, was around $800. You could stay in residence and everything about $2,000. And that was the only scholarship I was able to receive, so I had to go out and work in order to finance my time here at UNB. So I spent 2 years at UNBSJ and then came here in 1975 and basically lived in residence. And that was transformational for me in the fact that I first started in computer science. I had taken Fortran and Watt5 and COBOL, and insofar as I enjoyed it, geology was my elective course. And it was during that time that Dr. Rast was here, who was the head of the department, and I just found I had an aptitude to geology, and so I switched my major in third year and went into full-time geology. And my very first job was working in the Northwest Territories in the Geological Survey of Canada. I applied, and I went from here. I'd never really been outside New Brunswick, once to Montreal. And here a young kid flew to Toronto, then to Winnipeg, then to Churchill, then to Baker Lake, then got in a snow ledge and went basically 100 kilometers east down Baker Lake and set up in a fly camp with 4 other people. There were 3 of us juniors who were, 2 were from Carleton, one was from the University of Ottawa and one was Carleton, and our head of the Geological Survey, and we ended up spending basically 4 months there living in a small tent. We got food in once a month that was brought in by a helicopter. So I learned a lot about how to use soy sauce and vinegar in order to keep things fresh, what not to eat, when to eat it, a bit of Arctic char, and I loved it. It started me on an adventure that basically continues to this day, the aspect of being in that part of Canada that so few people see. And I spent my first 4 years there working in 76, 77, 78, 79. I really enjoyed going back each year. And started on discovery. It's when I first started looking for gold back in 1977, so I've been doing that. And if you want to talk about blue sky, there's lots of blue sky in our Canadian North, and so I've been following it ever since.
Absolutely. Fantastic. It's amazing to see that part of your career, and I know it was eye-opening for me to get to work in the Canadian Arctic. First year out here, people interviewing students and getting that experience. And with some of Bob's successes, obviously finished his degree here in the latter part of the 1970s and went and did a MINEX program, very famous MINEX program at Queen's University that really, I think, is a focus for many people who are hiring some of the most practical, applied explorationists. And so, Bob, as you know, universities are transformative experiences in many ways. It definitely was, obviously, for me here. I have lots of my own stories. Unfortunately, some of the students know them. And anyway, I'm very curious to hear about your perspective on transitioning to university students, academics at that time, geology experiences, whether it's in the field schools or in the classroom, during those transformative years for yourself.
Yeah, as you point out, I must give the credit to Dr. Ina McAllister. It was in my 4th year economic geology class, and we were doing 3-point problems, and that's what really got me intrigued with geology, and particularly economic geology, being able to go out and discover. Working with the Geological Survey, I'd gotten in experience just doing mapping, but it was through the work with Dr. McAllister that I get intrigued with what you could do with economic geology and decided that was an area which I wanted to go. So I spent a few years first working in the field, getting experience. I worked initially with a company called Essex Minerals, and my boss of that was Dr. Robert Jones, who was also a UNB graduate. Gave my first job, and Bob is now living in Douglas, and I come back every year and go maple syruping with him down in Worrell. So I've had a long association with him. And it was that work, but the first 2 years taught me that I was going to need more education. But if I wanted to be focused more on mine exploration, then the MinEx program, which was offered at Queen's, was really good. And the two things there that I found useful was one, the metallogeny course, which Jay Hodgson presented, and there you could go and get an idea of large metal landscapes where you could come in and start looking for mines, and certainly have applied that a lot in the energy that I've done. And the second was the course that Brian McKenzie had on economics, where we would take cash flow. And the one thing that I hadn't been aware of, through 1977 up through till I completed or 73 when I started till I completed my master's in 81, was the impact of metal cycles on jobs, when you could get a job and when you couldn't get a job. And you were somewhat removed from that. By taking that course, it suddenly struck you that, high metal prices impacts on the cash flow that you could see going through the mining company, and therefore that could then determine the outcome and the amount of exploration that they may have to be able to provide and support. So getting lots of experience, sat on a lot of drills at that point in time, and it was also my decision after my master's to go work for Teck Corporation, because it was a Canadian company at the time run by the Dr. Keevils, and I wanted to get mine experience. So the first thing they did is they sent me up to Lamaque, which is a gold mine in Val-d'Or, Quebec. I worked at 6,000 feet below surface in a high-grade gold mine. And right after that, they sent me in quick succession to Hemlo, which was a new and upcoming gold mine district. And when I arrived at that mine, it was an exploration play. And 40 years later, they're still producing gold from there. When I arrived, and we knew there were a few million ounces of gold, but there's been well over 20 million ounces mined from there. But it was the experiences that I was able to obtain there, particularly looking at the economic geology and how structural geology played a role in it, the metamorphism played a role, and was able to use that skill set later on when I went and worked at Pretium. And actually, my conviction was there was a high-grade gold mine at the Brunswick because of that experience that I gained. And so I, speak to the field schools that we had here at UNB. Both the second, third, and fourth year field schools that we went in were certainly very instrumental in helping out. I can only stress how important those are, which was the reason of working with Silver Standard to fund the field schools here and also provide scholarship as well because of what the opportunity I had from this university.
Yeah, I happen to have some of that ammo, which I do
Right.
think was a pivotal point in your career.
Right.
It's obviously important to be involved with a major discovery that moves to a mine over 25 million ounces in the end, and low. So, important. And we still show bores here, and like Arnie did, passing the samples around, getting familiar with what is good and what's maybe not so good. I think it's good to know.
So on that, I would make the point of how critical that is. That when and we'll come to this in the discussion, but when I decided to take the Pretium mine on, it was a 4-inch piece of drill core that I looked at, that when I noticed it, it had probably 30% gold in it or 30% electrum within a quartz vein with very little alteration on the selvages. And I had done my undergraduate thesis, I guess here if you want to call it, with Dr. Jerry Govett in geochemistry. And so it always struck me that you couldn't evolve that much gold out of solution with that little alteration unless the fluids were supersaturated, and therefore there had to be a crystallizing event all at once. And so it's the geology that you're taught here that's important for making economic decisions down the road. And that's what we say. That importance of seeing that 4-inch drill core eventually created a $3.5 billion company. But it was that piece of drill core and learning that I had was able to help me get there.
Absolutely. Some of those successes led to some of these awards that are on the board here, and sorry, I didn't have a PPT good enough, only because we had some technical issues earlier, but I think we have them solved. But some of this led in 2006 to the Dufresne Award from CIM for excellent achievement in exploration related to some of your work earlier, as well as through Silver Standard. And then the Dufresne Award is sort of the Valet Award as a contribution to the mining industry. Some major awards, obviously. I am very passionate about CIM over the years, as was Arnie, and I like being part of the organization for quite some time. And then obviously further success, a bigger one in some ways is the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame that we have up here, and we were lucky enough with several other people at UNB to attend those this year. So congratulations on being the 200th recipient of that very prestigious award, amongst quite a few other people from UNB that have also received that award. It's almost like a mine creator school here for some reason. So again, a testament to some of the things you're talking about.
All taught by Arnie.
Taught by Arnie and Mackenzie before him, because I think Mac and some others were taught by Dr. Mackenzie. So, as you noted in some of your excellent experiences in various aspects of exploration, especially the leading to Teck and the Hemlo gold discovery and development in the early 1980s. It was this enthusiasm and attention to detail and discipline that Dr. Keevil realized that you were somebody to invest in specifically, as well as many other Teck that, some of which I know I'm happy to name, Pat Dillon and others, who have also received the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame. I love what Norm Keevil, Dr. Keevil had said actually about Bob Quartermain in his book, Don't Rest on Your Laurels, but you'll have to read that book in order to get it. But it is a fantastic read, and I very much appreciate Norm mailing that out to me. Obviously one of the things that we're saying was about your phenomenal intuition abilities that you just talked about, that relates a little bit to the science, a little bit to the practical aspects, and then knowing how to drive home and invest in your own ideas that has led to the considerable success that you have. So that in part led as well to the success of Silver Standard Mining, which Bob was CEO of for obviously quite a few years. It was backed in part by Teck. And, so Silver Standard success really came from several discoveries in Argentina, maybe Bolivia as well. I'm not really that closely netted with that. But, skyrocketed into that blue sky, phenomenal success, raising the value on that and driving that stock to record highs at the time, recognizing the importance of silver and transitioning in part away and into other precious metals other than gold. So, but that's all in Argentina. I love Argentina. You obviously being in Salta and other places, amazing. So, on the flag, there's two blue things. Is that ocean, or is that blue sky and ocean on their flag?
In Argentina, yeah, probably. Well, I think in Argentina is a great amount of natural resources, and it's a wonderful country. And as you point out, we're involved in two mines developed down there. One was the Manantial Espejo mine in the southern part of the province, the southern part of the country in Santa Cruz State, that we went down and picked up in Silver Standard, and then ultimately joint ventured with Pan American Silver. It was a smaller project, and so we got bought out, and the mine actually still operates, and we went and took the funds from that and deployed them up to the Pirquitas mine, which was an old underground mine in northern Argentina in Jujuy province that we developed into a open pit operation. one of the key aspects of its development is we were working with the Indigenous people in the north up there because they were largely inhabited in the area, and we went and trained such that over 90% of the employees at the time were coming from the local province, and many were coming from the local communities. Many of the truck drivers we first started with had never driven vehicles. Matter of fact, our first 20 truck drivers, I think of our 100-ton trucks, were all local women, Indigenous women who'd never been in vehicles before. I think we spent 1,200 odd hours in simulators to be able to train them to be able to come and do the job that we needed. So, one aspect of our industry that we learned is not only the technical side of it as a geoscientist to be able to recognize ore and determine what or may not make a mine, but then dealing with the whole social license aspect and ESG, which we'll speak about from that, about bringing in, being able to train individuals locally and make sure that there's a good local presence in what we do. But again, from those early days with Menantiel and Perquitas, it came from that economic understanding I had that you could look at drill core, could put some economic parameters around it, do cash flow modeling, and that then determined which project we would take on or not take on. Silver Standard, over the course of 25 years, as you pointed out, when I started, we had a market cap of around $2 million. When I left, it was $2.5 billion, and it was based off of good, solid science, but then applying economics around it, and we would make those tough decisions. We as geologists often get a project and can fall, what I often say, in love with it, and you keep drilling it. There's a point where you have to determine that you've spent enough money, risk money on it, and you need to pivot to where you're getting success. It may be that afterwards someone else will come back and reinterpret it and be able to follow it through, and I've seen that happen. But Silver Standard success was at a time of low silver prices. We were acquiring assets which were out of favor. When the silver price rose up, the share price rose up, taking it to a $2 billion market cap, but allowed us to develop those two opportunities which we had seen between Menantiel and Perquitas, and a number of other projects we both discovered have continued to be developed, and that companies continue to evolve since I left, where it now has, I think, about a $4 billion market cap. And it's one of the longest trading companies on the Canadian Exchange. Silver Standard was actually started back in 1946 and started trading on January the 17th, 1947, and has been continuously traded for 75 years now. Testament to good, sound geology. That's a foundation for that company that's allowed it to thrive for so long.
Excellent. Yeah, fantastic. Beautiful country to work in, beautiful people, and bringing them success in a region that I know is economically prosperous. Yeah, very important in terms of aiding fundamental development and so on. But obviously, you paid attention in Brian Kenzie's class there on the cash flow related aspects, because it's important. So, it's one of the interesting things, I was kind of disappointed when I heard Bob was stepping down as CEO of Silver Standard, and then it seemed like just the next day he was started kicking off Pretium. And yeah, one of the things with that is he already had an asset that he was securing in a phenomenally beautiful, one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been and worked in Stewart, BC. Lots of blue sky, at least if you fly above the clouds sometimes,
Yeah.
obviously. And but you secured an amazing land package and renamed it into the Valley of the Kings. And as you said, you had like so much gold in some of your outcrops, and drill core was really quite phenomenal. And as I was joking with Bob, I said, yeah, the pharaohs themselves would have been impressed by how much gold is there, and how the Valley of the Kings has transformed almost in record time in Canadian history to an active gold mine, and so on. So again, from discovery to production in record time, that I think that there's something there that is a testament to working with everyone in parallel to achieve these successes. So I wanted you to just talk about that evolution and those success.
Yeah, sure. As Dave pointed out, I'd retired from Silver Standard in January of 2010, And the Brunswick project was one that I'd had an interest in. We had a few drill holes from 2009 drilling where we hit 16 kilograms of gold, so that's almost 1.6% gold, over a meter, which was intriguing to see. And I thought there would be a mine there if they kept drilling on it. The determination after I left by the Silver Standard Board was to look at selling the asset, and they couldn't find anyone specifically to sell it because most people could see the low-grade mineralization and the spotted high-grade. But again, it was my experience working at the Lamac gold mine, and then at Hemlo, I could look at having both a sustaining lower-grade mineralization with the high-grade within it. And so I made an offer in this fall of 2010 to buy it back. They wanted $450 million. I was a single individual. I didn't have that kind of cash, but I agreed to do it. And I went around and spent 90 days traveling around once I took the project up, 60 days on the road, and basically went out and raised $263 million from institutions. And institutions actually next week I'm going to go see with my new venture. And that allowed us to buy the asset. And as you pointed out, looking at the good geology, this very high grade, our highest grade intersection was 44 kilos of gold over about 1.5 meters. So you're looking at 4.4% electrum, so very high grade gold. But it's held within a much lower grade gold copper bulk tonnage. So you're looking at 1 billion tons of about 1 gram of gold. So it was this aspect, again, taking the knowledge I'd learned from larger systems at Queens and the economic parameters and putting those around it. And once we determined that the gold was going to allow us to have a high-grade mine, then because of working at mines and understanding the permitting processes, very quickly we engaged in doing economic studies by doing preliminary economic assessments, going right into pre-feasibility study on it. The team I had with me, Joe Ofsnick and Ken McNaughton, had both worked at Silver Standard for 25 years together. And so we came over, put a small group together, but we each had our own areas of expertise. And so mine was to get out and promote, but also help with talking with the political side. Because as Dave pointed out, it was both the federal and provincial government which had their specific timelines of what we needed to meet. So as we started developing the project, we would look at and think long-term, what is the baseline work we need to look at doing now in 2010 and 11 and 12 if we have a mine that will satisfy the regulators and give the baseline work? And so because of previous experience, we did all of that with that plan and process. So when you look at it, our first preliminary resource was in 2012. We used that in order to come up with our mine assessments, which we did both at the provincial and federal levels, and would go and talk to them about what they wanted. And as we know, water is a very big issue in any environment. And up there, the Brunswick sits in a kind of a low sulfidation system, so that water is naturally a little slightly lower pH. But we had to produce from the mine distilled water to go back in the natural environment. That's the regulation, because you need to minimize your impact on fish. And although we may have spent $40 million for that treatment plant and spent a lot of time treating the water, it at least goes out pure. The environment it gets into may ultimately have, I think, has a pH of about 3 in it, because it runs over, the water does run over some fairly acidic material. But rather than trying to argue about the science around it, we did what was necessary. We also had very early engagement with First Nations. There are a number living in the area. The government mandated that we had to deal with the Nisga'a, which were a treated First Nation, also with the Tahltan, which are to the north of us, and then we also dealt with the Skikamlaha, which is a smaller nation in and around the more or less the Gitxsan area. And we engaged with them early on, talked about what we were doing, and I'd be happy that we were able very quickly. We applied for our permits in 2015, received them, and started construction in 15. We went out and raised about $600 million US, built the mine in 2 years, and on July the 1st, 2017, basically 7 years after I started, the company poured its first gold bar, and it's been making money and profit ever since then, which then allowed it to be taken out for $3.5 billion or $3.4 billion a little earlier this year by Newcrest. But good science and good interaction with local communities. I'm pleased to say that at Brunswick Mine, they have about 30% First Nation employment and about 25% gender parity. So we tried to create a very inclusive environment, did a lot of training, And again, it came from that basic geology that I received here, along with the experience I gained at Queen's, but more importantly, just the experience I gained working globally in mines, understanding what a mine needs, what the regulatory environment needs, and that's why so much focus now on environmental science is important for you as geoscientists, because it's something you're going to need in your career as you go through, no matter where you may end up, in what jurisdictions you may work at, and what vocation you may ultimately have as a geoscientist.
Absolutely. Working in parallel, our master juggler of so many things to make things happen as efficiently and quickly as possible to get funds back to investors who had confidence in you for doing that very thing. So kudos to you for that. And you did start off in part with your mentioning that you transitioned into another venture up here. You'll see that Bob was taken on as a co-chair of Dakota Gold Corp, which is in essence a major land holding in and around Homestay, which I think was really the largest gold producer for over 100 years.
Yeah, it operated over 125 years, produced over 40 million ounces of gold, the largest banded iron formation, I believe, over such a contained area. It's only about 2.5, 3 miles of strike length, goes from surface down 8,000 feet. And to have that in, again, high-grade mine operating at about quarter ounce, or 7 or 8 grams mined over that length of time, 125 years. But the opportunity I saw there is that mine shut down in essence in 2000 at a price when gold prices were $300 an ounce. Gold price is now almost $1,800, 6 times as high, which means a lot of material in and around that jurisdiction, which previously wouldn't have been mined because they needed a quarter ounce cutoff, is now something you can sunlight because of my experience both working at Hemlo, working at Brunswick, where you can start looking at cutoff grade perhaps of 2 to 3 grams. And that then suddenly opens up a lot more opportunity. And the reason I get involved in this is because of the exploration potential that I've seen. I've had at Silver Standard, at Pretium, and hopefully we'll realize here again.
Yeah, more blue sky than maybe ever before.
Right.
But we do need some clouds, otherwise it gets kind of dry and arid. But fantastic pivot to that new company, that developing company. So that between when you left Pretium a few years ago and so on, I know you started. I know you were traveling before for different reasons, and also after Pretium. And I thought, okay, Bruce Jack was the feather in your cap, and that you were going to relax a bit, and then obviously you pivoted to doing this. But you were talking about some of your travels with me, including you were trying to go for an expedition to Antarctica, which I haven't been to. So that was really of interest. And so I actually was quite lucky in our careers myself, similar to you, going around looking at properties and stuff when I was younger, and then doing research and then presenting at conferences when I was younger, but never really got out in the world till I saw success when I was older. But you obviously have. You've kind of secured enough financially to be able to do whatever you want. And from world traveling, I found that it was really eye-opening. That it is eye-opening traveling around Canada, especially in northern Canada, working with different peoples and different cultures. I just wanted your insights into that and how that helped you grow and develop a different perspective about the world.
Sure, as I said, when I left here in 1976 to go work in Baker Lake, that summer was important because we had a lot of dealings with the local Inuit. They would often go out on hunting or fishing parties, and they'd stop in and have cookies or something. They didn't speak any English, and I'd, feed them, and they'd come in and talk amongst themselves and go away. And then a day or two later, they may come back and they'd bring back big Arctic char, which was great to have that they'd caught fresh. So it taught me first about respectful relations. So as you travel the world, you're always a visitor in whatever jurisdiction you've gone into. I've worked in 18 countries around the world, all through the Americas, through Latin America, much through South America, And then did a lot of work over in Africa, in West Africa, in Ghana, Burkina Faso, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, worked in South Africa, and then I've done work both in Russia and in China. And we actually, for one time, ran a small little sapphire mine and got our stones cut in Sri Lanka. So used to have to take our stones over to Sri Lanka to get them ground by the small little women there. It was largely a cottage industry. So saw great parts of the world. And the good thing I always would do is we would take time if working in Argentina, then would take a little bit of time to tour around and either visit parts of Patagonia. As you pointed out, always wanted to go down to Antarctica. I did that a few years ago after I retired. Went on a boat trip down there. Saw a little bit of geology. Much of it's covered with ice, of course, in that regard. But up in Niue province, wonderful geology in Niue province. And then, certainly the Andean mountains through the work I've done in Chile. The great thing is we geologists, we can take it wherever we go. So when you go look at a property, then it's often to take that time and go visit some of the local cultures. But I, learned early on to do that in a respectful way. One of the more interesting opportunities I had was after I finished my master's, Ian Nicol, who is a geochem professor, was also doing consulting for the United Nations. So he worked for the UNDP. And he approached me to go down and consult on a project in northern Haiti, which was called Grand Bois and Moronbosa, which would both be economic deposits. So I went down to look at consulting first for the United Nations, and I had a little blue passport, which was a great thing for a year, and traveling around the world. I wish I still had it these days. And we started working on that opportunity, and my good friend Ross Beatty, who I spent a lot of time with both in the silver industry and now in our philanthropic work, teed up with me. We weren't able to get the project developed. There were just lots of barriers that were put in by different regulatory authorities. But we did experience a number of coups, and so Ross has some of the more interesting coup stories. I was through a few, and getting AK-40 machine gun fired at close range, is certainly a sound that you get familiar with and you're not trained to have. And so that was an experience that I can't say I enjoyed, but certainly opened my eyes. And when we worked in Africa, certainly dealing culturally over there, one had to be much aware about local nuances, the same working in either China or Russia. And I think it was all of that work over the course of a 30-some-odd-year career that allowed me ultimately to decide when I looked towards retiring, wanted to come back to Canada, or at least North America, which allowed me to go on and develop the Brunswick asset. It was in my backyard in British Columbia. And now with the Homestake asset and what we're doing with Dakota, again, somewhere I'm close to, because it is challenging. But those of you with youth, I would say get out there, and the extent that you work with mining companies, visit multiple jurisdictions around the world, and you'll go and find mines and opportunities there as I had.
Excellent. It was interesting. I like the little quote that Scott Beatty had said about you when you were down in Patagonia. I think that you would go out doing geology and like you would keep going and going, like the Energizer Bunny. I think he used as a quote for you, Scott. Phenomenally, Ross Beatty. Ross, phenomenally successful geologist and entrepreneur as well. So anyway. So you're very well known and extremely highly respected for donating your time and energy, especially to UNB. And you've made that very well known and have had an enormous impact here in earth sciences particularly. And for those that don't know, Bob was co-chair of our last capital campaign, which raised $125 million for UNB, mostly for student scholarship. So, I'm breaking up here. The important part of that, though, is that the generosity really has no bounds. I did find out, when I went to the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame awards thing, and I happened to talk to David Ganong, who was standing by himself, and I was just chatting about stuff with him, because obviously it's David Ganong, and he told me the story about how you really wanted a nice round number, and that in order to make that happen, we both chipped in, and yeah, it speaks volumes to your commitment to UNB, to students, and the blue sky ahead that they're going to see because of your generosity. So, are there any takeaway lessons that you think people should have about philanthropy, whether it's time, resources, or whatever, that we all should hear from?
Well, I would only say that coming from small town St. Stephen, my grandfather had always said it's always be able to give good to give back, and I think that's what started. As I said, I got an entrance scholarship here for $400. It was the only monies that I received, and that $400 has gone off to the career that I've been able to have today. You have to remember that all the rooms that you sit in, I sat in. I sat in all these classrooms, right, back in 1974 and 75. And so when I come back, it's great to be able to see how the building has been able to evolve, both with putting the Quartermain Center in, which I hope is a good resource tool, but more importantly, it's able to bring in our next generation of geoscientists. We're bringing in the school kids who are able to come in here and get that interest started, because the world's it's a tough place out there right now. And we look at what we've been able to do through my generation, which has been, I would say very material. We've got lots of material aspects to it, but as a result of that, the world certainly needs some help from its environmental aspect of cleaning up. We have to get better at doing recycling. And so there's been an evolution of what the geoscience that I was exposed to, this environmental geoscience, that I think we now need to be able to look at. And my ability to give back now, particularly through the Earth Science Center, through the scholarships, which some of you may have, certainly through other supports I do here at the university. One I'm very keen on is the research fund that I sponsor through my parents, which basically seeds research that we can all go on to improve the world and the environment that we live in. And by able to give back as I have now, it allows me to see those outcomes rather than wait till the end of my life. I prefer to do it now. I've given away until last year almost about 20% of what I've been able to make to date, both through the work we do here at UNB is probably one of the largest beneficiaries of that. But I was involved with the Canstranded Trail, which I enjoy every day. I usually get down and walk every day before I start work here in New Brunswick. And I do philanthropic work with biodiversity, with Panthera as an organization that I work along with Dr. Tom Kaplan and Ross Beatty, and then have my own interest in diversity that I do through the ARC Foundation and through SOGI UBC, and also we do SOGI UNB here as well. So there's a wide area, but it all is involved education and improving the lives of individuals and improving the capacity that geoscientists can have through things like the Earth Science Center. And Dr. Timmerman's done a great job in being able to take that vision and expand it, walking in and seeing the dinosaur footprints today and how they lead to biology and how we have this great integration. And that's what the world is more about, is the integration of the sciences and how we collaborate together and not be siloed. And that's how we have to function within the world and within the philanthropic work that we do. It's all about creating a better platform for everyone.
Excellent. We'll finish off with this. I was very touched by your message that you had on equity, diversity, inclusion, related to your own personal experience. Message resonated widely at the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame Awards speech that you gave. That quite rightfully got a prominent standing ovation, which I've never seen. I've been to a few, mainly because of other awardees from UNB and stuff. So, it was definitely a moving moment for many people. And please, could you share your thoughts on the importance of EDI and other aspects of how we create more room and opportunity for everyone, and creating more of that blue sky for them, compared to maybe say some of the cloudier episodes we've had, through our recent history.
Right. I mean, diversity starts with those of you I'm looking at right now. In my fourth year geology class, we had 7 guys and 2 women. And looking here, we have certainly diversity, not only gender diversity, but diversity in race. And I think the point that Dave was trying to make is that we need to make sure that we're inclusive as an industry. When I grew up, it was probably a little more biased. It was certainly definitely male-centric in that regard. But we have to find talent wherever we can find it. And that talent has to feel safe when they come in, because one of the things that we do in this industry is always talk about safety, but it's not only the physical safety, but it's your personal safety. Up until 1992, if you were a gay man in working in industry, you could be fired. It was still, the law still allowed that. Matter of fact, it wasn't until 1992 that the World Health Organization changed its definition that sexual diversity was no longer considered a mental health issue. So that's within my lifetime. I was 37 years old, where I still had to manage who I was in order to protect myself within my job. Now, I was fortunate with tech that I had great competencies. I ran my own companies and did it. But it's one of the reasons why I have focus on diversity, both in education through the SOGI, which is sexual orientation, gender identity platforms that we operate both in British Columbia under SOGI 123 and also with SOGI UBC, that's necessary going forward. You never know where you're going to find talent and who has the talent. And we have to make sure this industry is one that creates the space for people who have a competency but have a love for the industry and passion as I have. Insofar as it may have been challenging because of the biases that exist in the industry back then, as we look to get rid of those and take them down, then it's one where we can create a much more inclusive and certainly expansive industry where everyone who wants to come and work, whatever your I say ultimate competency may come as geoscientists or geoengineers or environmental scientists, that companies need a wide variety of skill sets now that perhaps they didn't previously. When they deal with their ESG, when they go into a different country, how are they going to be able to approach that? So there are lots of talents which need to come into the industry, and we have to ensure that it's a safe place for it. And so not only do I like educating the world on geology, but also about social license. And those are things important to me because of what I lived in my own experience in wanting to make sure that the next geoscientist, irrespective of their race, their gender, their sexuality, feels welcome in this industry as I have been.
Yeah, and you've been a big proponent supporting a lot of those things for many years. So obviously resonates with many people these days. I definitely urge you to take a look at the video associated with the Canadian Mining Hall of Fame's award. As I said, very moving. The 200th recipient of that award, and fantastic anchor speech. Absolutely blown away by it. Anyway, Bob, I think we've used up most of our time. I'm hoping to be able to get maybe some questions from the floor. Anybody that's interested in asking Bob some questions. And we usually kind of wait for an undergrad to ask a question and then move through some of the more senior faculty. So do we have any brave undergrads that want to ask any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of interested, from your perspective, what it was like moving from a small town like St. Andrews to maybe say the Northwest Territories, but also like bigger cities. After growing up in Brunswick.
Yeah, and so I spent most of my formative years in St. Stephen, at least growing up from there. I think the key thing is that foundationally, I was brought up with a really supportive family, and whatever family values you get, you can transport anywhere that you take. The reason I'm back here is for family. I still have a home here and back here to spend Thanksgiving because it's such a beautiful time of the year. But you're living for 4 years in a tent with anywhere from 4 other to maybe 20 people means you have to get along with everyone. So that was one thing. And I think that's one thing I learned early on is you don't make people wrong for who they are. You get put in with other professionals, whatever they're, however they've been brought up, and you just work with them for the best outcome. And I live in downtown Vancouver, and I look at about 100,000 people out my window. And I've been living there for 35 years in that same condo just because it's convenient for me. But I also have a house that I now live on an island where I retire, where I'm largely by myself with a few individuals. And so I think it depends on the grounding you get. And I was able to get a good solid grounding here from a family perspective and very secure in who I was because of the both the education I received and how I evolved through my career. So, you know, I can be comfortable in a tent, you know, living in a small community of only a few hundred people to living in a large city. It's not the same for everyone, but again, you know, whether I worked in Africa, whether I worked in Latin America, in small communities where they have subsistence living, and taught me how privileged we are here in this country with what's going on, certainly globally, and the pressures that people are getting. And so I think it's you as an individual is to just to look at your own environment and do the best that you could there. So even if I was, you know, sitting in a fly-infested tent on the side of Baker Lake, it was still the adventure. Or as you point out, when I go down to Patagonia, the great thing about there's outcrop everywhere. So even if in the afternoon I'd finish work, well, I'd just go out and start to map rocks because it was always intriguing, as I saw in fourth year geology, of mapping, you know, some of the igneous material rocks you would see down at Popologan or where we would do our field schools. So at least as a geologist, you can always carry your profession and competency with you. So whether it's a small town or big town, you know, even when I go walking around Vancouver, people look at this, will look at a building and say, that's a pretty rock. And I'll say, well, do you know, actually, that's probably a Precambrian granite from, you know, somewhere in Brazil based off the size and how the slabs are. So being able to carry it wherever you can, but if you've got a good solid foundation, whether you're in a tent or whether you're in downtown Vancouver, it certainly hasn't mattered to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thanks a lot, Graham. Any other questions? I know everybody's so intimidated by me up here.
Yeah, me too.
There, Alan, yeah.
Yeah, one thing I've seen a lot of geos that they try to get really good at the technical skills, but they put aside their social skills or how to approach people, their financial skills. So my question would be like how to make sure that we'll have at the same time all of those skills and not just focusing on the technical part.
And I think that's something that the university has to look at. And, you know, Dr. Timmerman and I were talking a little earlier about the competencies that they're now looking at putting in high school curricula that focus more on earth science. Because when I went to school, there was no earth science or geology at all. And mine evolved from my grade 7 science teacher being able to go out. But that's why I chose to do my master's at Queen's, which had a balance not only of looking at exploration opportunities, but had the cash flow model around it. Where it was lacking was in dealing with the humanities side of it. You're right. If you're going to go as an exploration geologist, which many of you may be, and be first point of contact with a small indigenous community in the mountains in Ecuador, you need to go how to go and approach that. First, you need to speak another language. I mean, it was fortunate here in New Brunswick. J'ai appris français à l'école pour 8 ans et je parle petit français. It was good for me to be able to speak that in West Africa, but my Spanish isn't that great. So I would first encourage you all, if you're going to be working in exploration in this hemisphere, is learn Spanish. That's certainly a lot of places where we're going to explore. And then as you point out, it's to understand that humanities aspect. Is first, you're a visitor in that area, understand the local history around it. So wherever I travel recently, as one of the trips I want to do, I wanted to actually go to the real Valley of the Kings in Egypt, which I did a few years ago. And so I spent a lot of time listening to audiobooks. I listened to those rather than read, about Egyptian history. So we're in Egyptian culture. So when I arrived to that place, I was aware of the culture that I was going to see, and that would have an impact. But it's one thing that you need to talk to your professors around, because ultimately curriculum is decided by a governing group. And I think that governing group needs to hear more from industry as to what we need when you come out of school. Yes, it's great to have the technical knowledge, and I love looking at thin sections of metamorphic rocks. But as important to that is going to be your ability to communicate with the local environment where you're going to be going to work. And so we have to see that we have complementary to the technical side, as you point out, some financial component, which should come out of your economic class. You understand how a cash flow works. and what you can do as it relates to determining an exploration project, whether it should go forward or not. But also when you go to that local community, how are you going to do all that interaction with the local population, and having a certainly more humanities taught as part of the overall geology curriculum will, I think, serve you well.
Coming from a mountainous region in the country beside Ecuador, I think that resonates with you. And you mastered many languages, Alan, so you're well on your way already. But one of the things that I've been encouraging, and I think now more of the professional organizations are encouraging, are these same type of workshop things, PD development afterwards, because without a doubt, some of the things you're talking about are the things that we get the least amount of, even though our education can be broadened in some ways, and because our careers make it that way, especially in interaction with a lot of people. So I think we're getting to the end. I know there's more questions that we'll follow up afterwards, but I just wanted to say thanks, Bob, for sharing your blue sky vision. It really is quite amazing. You have talked about some of the cloudy days and some of the other days as well, but really having a optimistic, being well prepared and appreciation for all people creates an optimism that creates a lot of blue sky, I think, for students in the future. And your long 45 years of career has really come out today in a big way, and showing how success can be in a variety of things, in a variety of ways, and that well, one of the things that I was always impressed on your extreme optimism was your level of discipline and stuff for doing anything and everything all the time, whether it's jogging on the Trans-Canada Trail or volunteering, raising money for UNB, always extremely industrious and thoughtful about it. So thank you very much, Paul. Great. Thank you. So we have a departmental gift. This is just launched this past weekend. It's the second edition, entirely revamped, of The Last Billion Years, which is a group of volunteers from the Atlantic Geoscience Society. And yeah, they've done a fantastic job. And Dr. Ann Timmermans has done a great job bringing it to various New Brunswick communities. So yeah.
Thank you.
Reading for you, and
as I drive around this next week, it'd be wonderful. It'd be right roadmap. That's right. You can make an audiobook. Thank you very much, and it's always a great day to be back here at UNB and to be here on what you call a blue sky day. So thank you very much.
I did look up the weather.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.